Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about aperture and depth of field. In our last video we have had discussed about shutter speed, which is one of the element of exposure triangle. Today we will talk about another element of exposure triangle called aperture. But before I talk about aperture in detail, I want you to be little bit aware of all the three components of exposure by understanding their definition at least. So later it will be easy for you to understand the fundamental. Let's start with aperture. Aperture controls the amount of light which provides either shallow or a large depth of field. Shutter speed is the amount of time light enters the camera to either freeze or blur the motion. ISO ISO is the light sensitivity of the sensor, which affects detail and sharpness by adding more or less noise and grain. Exposure is the balance between these three elements. These elements of exposure triangle are also known as pillars of photography. Now, what magical or creative role aperture plays? It adds dimension to photography by controlling depth of field by either blurring the background or any part of the photograph which you can see on left side picture. This is called shallow depth of field, or bringing everything in focus which you can see on right hand side picture. This is called sharp depth of field. Now, what is aperture? It is a hole in the lens through which light travels into the camera body. Now, what happens inside your lens when aperture changes? It looks like this. f1.4 is the maximum opening in this example. If you go one stop smaller, it will be f2 and it will be closed one stop. Two stop down, it will come on f2.8 and so on. And smallest is f22 in this example, which is the minimum opening of the aperture. These round blade or iris of the lens that controls the size or diameter of aperture is called diaphragm. Purpose of this diaphragm is to block or allow the light to go through the aperture. Aperture is expressed or denoted by f numbers known as f stops. This f describes the size of aperture or how open or closed the aperture is. Smaller f number means larger aperture, while larger f number means smaller aperture. Now, on the right hand side, if you notice, same picture taken on different apertures. So this is technical control of aperture. If you remember, aperture is one of the element of exposure triangle, which means it controls exposure by allowing or blocking the amount of light. And how it works, you can understand by following picture on the right hand side. Very first picture, which is clicked at f16, which is the smallest aperture in this example, allows least light to enter. That is why photograph is darker. Let's observe second image, which is clicked at f11, or one step up from f16. It allows one stop more light to enter the picture, which is little bit brighter. Similarly, you can notice different exposure at every one step up, and at f8 it is more bright. Here f4 picture is correctly exposed, and at larger than f4 picture is becoming over and overexposed. I just explained how exposure works at small and large aperture. Now, once again, let's understand how aperture controls depth of field. With the help of this chart, you can easily understand the correlation of aperture size and depth of field. At large aperture, you will get shallow depth of field, and at small aperture, you will get good depth of field. It works same way like if you have ever watered the plants in the garden through a water pipe. If you put your thumb in front of pipe, water goes quite far than the large opening of pipe. Similarly, when aperture is small, you get better or high depth of field. But depth of field is not only controlled by aperture. There are two more factors: focal length of your lens and distance between your subject and camera. Let's talk about second factor, focal length of your lens. Zoom or telephoto lens can create shallower depth of field than wide angle lenses. Increasing zoom or focal length helps to blur the background by creating shallow depth of field. In this example, you can see everything is same except focal length. Aperture, shutter speed, ISO, light conditions, everything is same. You can easily notice difference between depth of field. At 20 mm focal length, you get greater depth of field, and at 105 mm, you get shallow depth of field. The third factor is placement of things or subject near or far. The closer the camera is to your subject, the easier it becomes to blur the background. Now let's talk about application of depth of field. You need shallow depth of field while taking a portrait, sports photograph, documentary, etc. Wider depth of field works well with architectural photography, landscapes, etc. For more questions and queries, you can always write to us at following email address. And for more informative videos, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you very much.